Alyosha is the son of the religious, crazy, saint-like mother, and her kind of intense religion produces two kids, and we're doing now their genetic background, so to speak, with this extreme religious temperament that she has. And we talked already about how Ivan is trying to rid himself of all impurities of what he calls the lackey side of himself, and he's trying to just clean himself of that. And now we're going to talk about Alyosha, who is trying to pure himself by accepting and transforming his sensual impulses. Though he doesn't know that's what he's doing yet. That's what Zosima tells Mrs. Holocaust she has to do, and it's clear that that's what anybody has to do who's trying to get together their whole self and not make their life work by getting rid of half of their self. Looking for my copy of the chart. I'm looking at the self in the brothers chart as I talk, because I'm looking to see how the factors get characterized. Interesting. I guess Alyosha hasn't got names for the factors. I never noticed that before. We know that base and noble are Ivan, and we know insect and angel for Dmitri. We've talked about them. But keep your eyes open. Let me know. I'll try to remember to keep my eyes open. Whether Alyosha has a name for the two sides. I have a feeling he doesn't, or I would have picked them up by now. But he certainly has the two sides. There's no question about that. So, and he's struggling to put the two of them together. There's no question about that. On page 30, we hear about all that. And now I'll try to give you sections. This is the third son, Alyosha, sort of about in the middle of that chapter. Toward the beginning of the chapter. He has a lot of problems with the sensual side of him, and it's talked about a lot on page 30, so I'm going to read you things. Seeing that I'm at the top paragraph in this book. Seeing that Alyosha Karamazov put his fingers in his ears whenever they talked of that, his schoolfellows sometimes crowded around him, pulled his hands away, and shouted nastiness in both ears while he struggled, slipped to the floor, tried to hide himself without uttering one word of abuse, enduring their insults in silence. But at last they gave up doing this. They left him alone and gave up teasing him about being a regular girl. And what's more, they began to look upon his modesty with compassion as a weakness. He was always one of the best in the class, but never first. I don't know why that's important to Dostoevsky, but all sort of little details are always important just to give verisimilitude. He was a big fan of Dickens because Dickens had so many sort of facts in his books, just because that makes it look more real. But what's important in that paragraph is that he can't stand any of those dirty words that even talk about the sensual side. But, and then I had never noticed this before either, that we're going to learn in a minute that he was convinced that nothing bad could ever happen to him. And it turns out that even in this case, they stopped doing this because this kind of passive resistance, he didn't struggle, he didn't insult them, he didn't do anything but just sort of fall to the floor. After a while, they gave up on that, and they liked him, they gave up teasing him and liked him. I mean, whatever bad thing might happen to Alyosha, he always manages somehow to turn it into something which is okay. Here, they look with compassion on, or they look with, they look with compassion on this kind of modesty instead of teasing him. And on this page, there's more. And remember I said last time in connection with Alyosha contrasting with Ivan that they both lived off relatives, and Ivan therefore wanted to be self-sufficient because he was so embarrassed at having lived off relatives. And I said Alyosha never cared who he was living off of, but I don't think I read this paragraph on the middle of 32, which says that. On what, and remember I said I don't know who feeds him, I don't know who clothes him, I don't know where he lives. I think that's probably true. Dostoevsky on purpose doesn't tell you, because it doesn't matter. On what terms he lived with them, that is, these people, I guess. Yes, the people who are taking care of him. He did not know himself. It was very characteristic of him that he never cared at whose expense he was living. In that respect, he was in striking contrast to his brother Ivan, who struggled with poverty for his first 2 years in the university, supported himself, and had from childhood been bitterly conscious of living at the expense of his benefactor. And the little below that about Alyosha, he scarcely seemed to know the value of money, and he never asked for any. And when anybody gave it to him, he kept it and didn't know what to do with it. And then somebody sums him up. All of this, he should remind you of the guy in the Fear and Trembling who is going home, who has no money. The other night of faith we hear about, which is sort of confusing in Fear and Trembling because we don't hear about his unconditional commitment, although he presumably had one or has one or will have one. But we do hear about his belief that all things are possible and that everything will be all right. He's going home thinking of this great stew he's going to have, but he really knows realistically that he's so poor all he's going to get is turnips. But and when he gets home and doesn't get the stew and gets turnips, that doesn't bother him a bit. Alyosha is like that. He's at the bottom. What Muazov, who's a kind of Enlightenment character who has a kind of sensible, rational view of what's going on, he says, "Here is perhaps the one man in the world whom you might leave alone without a penny in the center of an unknown town of 1 million inhabitants, and he would not come to harm. He would not die of cold and hunger, but he would be fed and sheltered at once, and if he were not, he would find a shelter for himself, and it would cost him no effort or humiliation, and to shelter him would be no burden. On the contrary, would probably be looked on as a pleasure." You get the picture. I mean, he is self-sufficient in a completely opposite way than Ivan. He's self-sufficient because he doesn't make any effort to support himself. He doesn't have any sense that there's any need to support himself. He just goes along with the conviction that all things are possible and everything will be all right. And the conviction alone makes him such a sort of positive, sunny character that everything always does turn out all right. That's a nice way for Dostoevsky to look at it. But he doesn't, even though he survives in the world, he doesn't really want to be in the world because the world is full of people like his schoolmates who have all these nasty thoughts and nasty words that reminds him of things that he doesn't want to think about. So for that, at the middle of 37, second page of Elders, he entered upon this path, that is, going into the monastery, only because at that time it struck his imagination and seemed to him to offer an ideal means of escape for his soul from darkness to light. You get that? Darkness and light. What do you know? That's one way to describe it anyway. I've been calling one of these sides of the factors the dark side to myself. Maybe I've even said it. So Alyosha has darkness and light at this stage. Obviously, there's something wrong with thinking about things that way, and we'll come back to that, but it's all because it leads to the wrong idea of the factors, namely that one of them is good and one of them is bad, and you should get out of the darkness and into the light. That's like getting out of the world into the Platonic heaven. That's like getting out away from the earth and into the heaven. Whatever it is, it leads off the earthly side as bad. But that's how he looked at things at that point. So he goes in the monastery because of the darkness, and because he thinks it's light there. And that's the rest of the story on him. We can compare it to Ivan, who on 32, where we see, I think I've already compared it to Ivan on 30. Yeah. So wait a minute. Let me I just read you something about Ivan, right? Where it says, unlike his elder brother Ivan. So, and we compare him to Dmitri then on 113. Okay, 113 is Confessions of a Passionate Heart in Anecdote. That's chapter 4 of something. There's so many books and divisions, I can't go back and look to see what they are. But anyway, in that confession, we hear about Dmitri, and we hear about something really weird about Alyosha at the same time. So Dmitri's going on as usual, right after his insects and sensual lust, to confessing that he's got this insect side, which he doesn't want to have, but which he certainly can't get rid of. And he says about a third of the way down, I love cruelty. Am I not a bug? Am I not a poisonous insect? In fact, I'm a Karamazov. Let me say a word about that at some point. It looks like Karamazov is the name for the dark side of the factors. And this comes up a lot. Ivan calls his bad side Karamazov. You'll see in a minute that Alyosha's bad side is called Karamazov, and here's Dmitri. It's very important, but I didn't put it on the chart for reasons I can't explain yet, and I won't be able to explain till literally the last sentence of the book. But in the meantime, you can put Karamazov in pencil. That means you may need to erase it at some point. But at this point, certainly Karamazov is being used by everybody as a name for the dark side. And he goes on about two-thirds of the way down. Though I'm full of baseness and love what's low, and here this is typical Dmitri, when he's just said that he's an insect and he's a Karamazov and so forth, what do you expect? Well, he's just said the Sodom and insect side, but what do you want to hear from Ivan, or from Dmitri, is always, of course, I'm also an angel, and of course, I'm also an honorable person, because he's always got the Sodom and the Madonna side, the insect and the angel. So he goes on, though I'm full of baseness and love what's low, I'm not dishonorable. You're blushing. Enough of this filth with you, or for you, he means there. Now, because Ivan goes into a bunch of details about how he seduced this girl and then didn't pay any attention to her for 5 months and so forth, and he's confessing how bad he feels about it, but that he's a gentleman anyway because he didn't tell anybody about it, and so forth. And this is naturally upsetting Alyosha. And so what Alyosha's response is very interesting. I'm still on 113. You say he says, I'm going to change the subject. And he says, don't be surprised that I'm glad to tell you instead of being ashamed. I mean, this is just more of Dmitri's complete flip-flopping between the two sides. And then it gets interesting. You say that because I blushed, Alyosha said suddenly. I wasn't blushing at what you were saying or at what you've done. I blushed because I'm the same as you. That's very important. That's the first evidence we've had, I guess. I'd have to go back and look and see if it's the first. But it's certainly evidence that Alyosha's got the same side, the insect, Sodom, base, dark, sensual, Karamazov side, as Dmitri. And he knows it. And Dmitri says, that's going a little too far. No, it's true, insists Alyosha. Obviously, the idea was not a new one. The ladder's the same. I'm on the bottom step, and you're above, somewhere about the 13th. That's how I see it. Well, that's pretty weird, isn't it? Because that you'd expect that he's going to say, well, we're the same, all right. You're down at the bottom someplace, and I'm 13 steps above you, period. I mean, he's not certainly wallowing in doing these bad things that Dmitri's doing. This is a very peculiar Christian thing that Dostoevsky just sort of throws off. What Alyosha is saying is that you're ahead of me because you're worse than me. That because I'm only beginning. That you're really wallowing in this sensual despair. And what's happening is, in the Christian view, which you get in Kierkegaard, that you've got to go into despair before you can be saved. The very idea, we're so used to hearing it that it just sounds like noise in our ears. That this is a Christian idea to be saved. Buddhists aren't saved. You've got to be saved because you've got to realize that on your own, you can't have a life that works. And you realize that by trying and getting deeper and deeper into despair. And Ivan is ahead of Alyosha in despair. That's what it means, I think. So he says, let's read it again. I'm the same as you. The ladder's the same. I'm at the bottom step, and you're above somewhere about the 13th, meaning that the ladder that goes, I don't know how to put it. I'm suddenly puzzled myself now. Alyosha's just beginning the despair. And Dmitri is higher than him because he's lower than him, because he's further down in the despair. That's what it's about. You get it in all sorts of ways. Remember in The Third Man, when at the beginning of the movie, when the porter says he's either in heaven or in hell, and we cut to the priest who says that Jesus descended into hell for 3 days. That's another peculiar part of Christianity. Why did he have to go down before? Why did he take a shortcut directly to heaven? You've got to go down before you can go up. That in Dante, whom I refer to every once in a while, he's got to go to the bottom of the inferno on his trip to paradise. Because that's the structure of this. And Kierkegaard's got the structure, and Dostoevsky's got the same structure. You've got to despair completely of being the kind of self that everybody is before you can come out of it. And remember, as Zosima tells Mrs. Holocaust I don't think I can just flip to it. Remember, he says to her, you have to keep looking at the dark side of yourself, and if you look into it more and more, you'll turn around and you will begin to see that that you're not in despair anymore. Now, we'll see more and more of this going on, but that's a hint of it. Now let's see where we are. Anybody? By the way, just raise your hand, yell if you want to say anything. Nobody wants to yell and say anything. Okay, let's see where we are. On 113, I think I just finished what I wanted to say. Let's see. Yes. Now, one more thing about Alyosha. Why is he in such good state? Well, partly, I said, because he just has faith. But he also has put himself together, more or less, by having a defining commitment. It doesn't really integrate the factors, but it certainly gives him a sense of having meaning and hope in his life. And he's integrated the factors sort of temporarily and partially. It's kind of tricky the way Dostoevsky's handling it on purpose. But he has got a defining commitment for Zosima. And that's making him able to go on and lead a very committed life. He has something like eternity and time already, something like the infinite and the finite already, because you get in Kierkegaard factors terms, you get that if you've got an unconditional commitment, and he's got that. You can see that on page 30, which is probably in the Alyosha. It's in the Third Son thing, a page in, where it tells us. Okay, I'm going to read this further, about 6 lines down. And the reason, I better read all of it from starting on the top. He was simply a lover of humanity, which is not right. That's the obtuse narrator coming in. Lover of humanity is just not the correct Christian way of thinking about it. He loves each particular person who's in his vicinity. He's loving his neighbor, not humanity. He was simply a lover of humanity, and that he adopted the monastic life was because at that time it struck him as the ideal escape for his soul, struggling from the darkness of worldly wickedness to the light of love. Look, it's all over darkness and light for him. Well, how did I miss it all these years? And then skipping down a little, and the reason this life struck him this way was that he found in it, at that time, as he thought, an extraordinary being, our celebrated elder Zosima. Now comes the commitment, to whom he became attached with all the warm first love of his ardent heart. So this is his current unconditional commitment. Now, as soon as you see that, when you're looking at it and have read Fear and Trembling, you ask yourself, and how is he going to deal with the death of Zosima, who's old and sick and not going to last much longer? And that's a big test, of course, for him. whether he's a knight of faith, whether he'll go into despair or resignation, or or whether he'll interiorize it. We don't know yet, but you'll get to find out. Yeah. Wow, that's good. But I think that's the right question, and the answer is supposed to be that he hasn't been tested in that. What sort of what I'm saying. He could still be in despair. I mean, the French woman in Hiroshima has an unconditional commitment, and she's in despair. So we don't know what he's going to do when Zosima dies, and in that way, he's not going through the despair of trying to get himself to the factors together as he has to. He's sort of protected from that. And that's why I said it was a kind of temporary, somewhat thing. If it was a full unconditional commitment and he had already understood that he could lose it and seen the sword over the head of the beloved and went on as if it was the shortest thing, well, that would be different. Boy, when Zosima dies, and it's going to be no surprise, given that he's very old, Alyosha's reaction is definitely not like that. It's very, very interesting what happens to him. But there also, this I just sort of say as an aside, because I had no idea what's going to happen. There's 3 pages left out of the edition you've got. I would never use this edition again. I didn't order this edition. But nothing important happens in those 3 pages. But what happens is that the Dostoevsky has a little avant-propos, a little word to the reader, saying that this is the first of 2 volumes that he is writing. This is the youth of Alyosha, and then he's going to write a book about Alyosha when he becomes grown up. And I take it that not only does he have to go through the test of the death of Zosima, but he has to go through really understanding that he's got a sensual dark side and he better deal with it. I like to think, but I suspect it's not so, that he's going to get seduced by Grushenka eventually, but maybe not. She's certainly trying. Where was this place? We're coming to it, where she's saying, where Rakitin says she wants to get him in bed or take off his cassock. That's what she says. Anyway, but I don't know what really happens to him in the second volume, except that he's got to sin more, despair more, and suffer more before he becomes the superhero or super saint or whatever it is that Dostoevsky wants him to be by the end of the second book. But Dostoevsky died, and he did leave some notes for the second book, but not enough that you could reconstruct it. Yeah.
That he wrote this book partly as a reaction to the death of his son from epilepsy, when his son was like...
Maybe. That may well be so. I haven't read that. This is the last book he wrote, Dostoevsky, and he had epilepsy. I didn't know his son did. But if it is a reaction to it, boy, is it far from showing up in the book. I think that's why nobody bothers to say that. Maybe, and I just don't believe it. It's clear from his notebooks that he's been working for years to get these ideas figured out. There are more ideas per page in this book than any philosophy book that I've ever seen. So it may, and I think he probably wrote it because, as he wrote most of his books, because he was out of money. He was desperately writing them, always in serial, always just getting them into the publisher in time for the next installment. And if you're looking, I'll show you one place, you can see him leaving a cliffhanger, like in a television series, where this installment's going to end and everybody's going to have to buy the next installment to see what's going to happen next. We come across one of these pretty soon. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Freud was interested in that. Freud wrote an essay on the brothers Karamazov, and it's more complicated than that. Not only is Fedor the name of the father and of Dostoevsky in the book, but I think Fedor is the name of Dostoevsky's real father, who, I gather from this introduction to this one, I knew it before but I'd forgotten, was killed by the serfs when Dostoevsky was 11. And Dostoevsky in here has Dmitri say, everyone wants to kill him. Who does? Everyone wants to kill his father. Freud, of course, his hair stood on end and thought, wow, this guy really understands something. And but Freud also said, I read somewhere, that he's not going to write anything more about this book because he sees enough sick people during his working hours. And he is not going to start reading Dostoevsky. You go ahead. What do you want to say? So that was not his father's name. Okay, good pointing out. I admitted I didn't know. But so but he gives his name to the name of the old father who, no, I can't tell you any more plot. Too much plot stuff is going to come out if I say another word. Okay, about that. Let's go on. I'm sorry every once in a while, but I certainly don't want to spoil this for you. As I say, this is one of the most complicated murder mysteries in the history of writing murder mysteries, and it's not even clear. Well, never mind. And I'm not going to talk about it. Okay, here we go. Back to where I am. You keep reading. So he's got a defining relation. He relates himself to himself. And he has, and now it's where I'm going to show you that he's like the Knight of Faith in Kierkegaard, coming home to thinking he's getting the stew and perfectly contented to get turnips. At the bottom of 105, which is chapter 3, Confessions of a Passionate Heart in verse, Alyosha, this is I've said already, but I'll show it to you. Alyosha was certain that no one in the whole world ever would want to hurt him. And what is more, he knew that no one could hurt him. This was for him an axiom assumed once and for all and without hesitation, and he went his way without hesitation, without question, and he went his way without hesitation, relying on it. That's to say that he lived in the field of faith, in which all things are possible, and that he who was willing to accept the agony will get the bread. It's the Christian picture that the world is a divine comedy, and in the end, in the world of the spirit, everything will always turn out all right. And Alyosha is tuned in on that. And for him, it always does. And in a certain way, I think Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky both think, if you are tuned in on that, you have such a optimistic, sunny, able to accept everything and see that it'll all be all right personality, that it does turn out all right. It's the defensive people, the vulnerable people who start feeling vulnerable or guilty and so forth, who mess up their lives, not people who like Alyosha. That's what Dostoevsky thinks. So, and now I say what I said to him. Alyosha, though, is an untested knight of faith. He hasn't faced real suffering. He won't even face real suffering in this book, but in the next book, which wasn't written, he was supposed to face more real suffering. But he's got already inner doubts and an understanding that there's something about himself that he can't deal with. And that's why he's holding his ears already. But now we hear more about that on 86, which is in A Young Man Bent on a Career. The Young Man Bent on a Career is Rakitin. You'll hear a lot about Rakitin. Rakitin's a very important character in the book. He understands more than any other character, I guess, except Zosima, what's really going on. Zosima understands it because he turns Christian love into a science. Rakitin understands it because he's always listening in and prowling around and picking up gossip and trying very hard to know he's a busybody and thereby knows lots of what's going on. But he's also got, and I can't explain this yet, but I'll show you a funny fact that you will have to worry about, and eventually we can find out. But there, he's talking to Alyosha. He's talking about Dmitri first at the top of 86, saying this about Dmitri. Why are you trembling? Let me tell you why. Your Dmitri may be honest. He is stupid but honest, but he's sensual. That's the definition and inner essence of him. He's your father who handed on to him his low sensuality. Of course, that's the dark side factor. Do you know, I wonder at you, Alyosha, how you can have kept your purity. You're a Karamazov too, you know. In your family, sensuality is carried to a disease. Now, and then at the bottom of that page, Rakitin sort of turns on Alyosha. I understand it. Let's see. Even Dmitri, he's talking about how they're all sort of lusting after Grushenka. Never mind that. Alyosha says, I understand that. And Rakitin says, you do? Well, I guess you do, since you blurted out like that, said Rakitin maliciously. It escaped you unawares. Your confession is revealing. So it is a familiar subject you've thought about. You've thought about it already, about sensuality, I mean. Oh, you virgin soul. You're a quiet one, Alyosha. You're a saint, I know. But the devil only knows what you're thinking about. Now, that's a wonderful line. You won't understand for a while why that line is so important. Rakitin is in some sense the devil. That's why Rakitin says the devil only knows. Dostoevsky has, you'll see lots more of this, but we're far enough along for me to tell you all about it yet. Dostoevsky's got this way of translating certain sort of Christian symbols into common sense terms. And when he does it, he always tells you that he's done it. Nobody in any book I've ever seen has noticed this. But this is just the first of many, many things. Yes, Rakitin is the devil in a certain way. And that's why the devil only knows what you're thinking about and what you know already. You are pure, but you've been down into the depths. And I've been watching you a long time. You're a Karamazov yourself. You're a thorough Karamazov. Birth and heredity have shaped you. You are a sensualist from your father and a crazy saint from your mother. Why do you tremble? It's true then. You know, there's this Grushenka hint. You know, Grushenka has been begging me to bring you to her house. I'll pull off his cassock, she says. You can't imagine how she begs me to bring you. I wondered why she takes such an interest in you. You know, she's an extraordinary woman, too. Thank her, but say I'm not coming, says Alyosha with a strained smile. Remember that later in the book. That's going to be important. Okay, there's so many things that Dostoevsky's dropping, little clues that I can't tell you anything except pay attention. So now where are we? So he withdraws from the world to get away from the sensual side. And he's going to be tested by his love of Zosima when Zosima dies, and let's suppose by Grushenka too, and he has to face up to all these challenges, and we have to see how he deals with them. Right now, his love of Zosima is holding everything together. He's not tempted by Grushenka. He's not worrying about Zosima not being there because he's there, and so forth. Okay, let's sum up now the four Karamazovs. So, Fyodor is running from facing up to the contradictory impulses in himself. That's the spiritlessness. That's R1. That's drunkenness and debauchery. Ivan wants in despair to deny or repress what he calls his base or lackey side. Dmitri is trying desperately to accept both factors and flipping back and forth, unable to define the factors, that is, angel, insect, Madonna, Sodom, in such a way that they could possibly ever be integrated. And Alyosha has provisionally solved his problem by sublimating all his impulses into his love for Zosima. It's okay. That's sort of where we are. Now, I don't know, not too many times when I was teaching this, I ran into a huge problem. Some very smart students said, but that doesn't sound right. That's all fine for Dostoevsky, but why do you map that on Kierkegaard's view of the self? What would Kierkegaard say about these factors? Well, he wouldn't say that there are the bad factors and the good factors, the dark side and the light side, and so forth. Kierkegaard thought that all the factors were equally good. If you even want to say good, they were equally basic and important and essential. That's why he doesn't talk about good and bad, light and dark, body and soul, and gives them new names, where the finite is good and the infinite is good, and the temporal is good and the eternal is good. I should say positive or something instead of good. They're all positive factors in the self. And Dostoevsky's story looks so different. And it looks Platonic. It looks as if the heavenly side, the noble angel, Madonna, good, according to Grushenka, prayer side, is the all positive, and the other side, base, insect, Sodom, bad, and beast, is the bad side. The only clue that this is not the whole story in The Brothers is Zosima, who has the earthly and the heavenly sides. And they don't sound nearly as incompatible as noble and base, angel and insect, good and bad, and so forth. So when I was sort of stunned by this remark, then I had to think about it some more and decided that it isn't that Dostoevsky's picture of the self is Platonic, meaning that half is good and half is essential, namely the eternal soul half and so forth, and half is something you should die to and get rid of. It looks Platonic because, and this is a subtle point, but you've got to get it, that the factors are defined differently by different people. And all the people at the beginning of the book have got views of the factors that get them unable to put them together and make one side look positive and the other side look negative. I hadn't realized till today that Alyosha has it too, with light and dark. You can't really put them together or just get gray, and that's not going to be the solution to anything. So that's the important point. That at this stage we're talking about the way the factors in the self or the heart look to the various characters. To Ivan, it looks like there's a dark side and a good side, and to Dmitri it does. And Ivan wants to be noble and get rid of the base. Dmitri wants to get on the side of the Madonna and of the, what's the other one? And the angel, get rid of the insect and Sodom, and so forth. So that's not what Kierkegaard is saying. But neither is it what Dostoevsky is saying. Dostoevsky really wants us to understand that each side is equally essential, equally important, equally good. He just, on purpose here, he's setting it up for how it looks when you haven't understood that yet. And as I say, there's a hint to keep you from losing your way. Zosima never loses this way. And Zosima sees that the factors are equally basic and positive. But so in Kierkegaard and in Dostoevsky, the factors look contradictory and incompatible if you relate to them in the wrong way. But there's a way to relate to the factors which keeps them from being contradictory and incompatible and makes them both equally essential and supporting each other. And of course, that's always the R3 relation. You have to do it by relating to another. And that's also Dostoevsky's view. And so everything will be all right in the end. But it's important to both see how, at this stage, it looks like Kierkegaard and not like Kierkegaard. And it has to come out in the end that the factors, when you get in the right relation to them, neither is bad. And you have to have a relation among them, which I like to put, the more of one, the more of the other. The more time, the more eternity. Eternity is only possible in time. The more infinitude, the more infinitude, and all that. I'm not going to go back over it. So much, and now there somebody might want to say something. I mean, I hope I made it clear enough so that you aren't confused or lost. It's fascinating. So the bottom line is the factors are neutral in the sense that if you understand them some ways, they're opposed. But if you understand them in other ways, they go together. And in the end, they go together because, in a way, in the world of the spirit, things work out all right. You could have a world in which the factors just never got together. And the only honest people saw that it was hopeless and were in constant despair. But that's not Dostoevsky's or Kierkegaard's world, because they're in the Christian world of the spirit. And they think that, to put it one more way, God became man. and therefore somehow got, like Pascal says, somehow Jesus got it together. We don't know how, but we have to imitate him. And they go further. They've got views about how to get it together. They, meaning Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky. Okay, that's clear enough. No objections, no puzzles. You're not lost. Okay, well then we go into something that's fun. I don't know where to put this little episode. I was running around. I was pushing it around in my computer in all sorts of different places. I don't think there's any place to put it, so we'll put it here. We haven't talked about, anybody notice that there may be somebody we should talk about that we haven't talked about among all the characters that are sort of Karamazov's? What? Smerzhikov, exactly. Well, I noticed the last time I gave it, I almost forgot Smerzhikov. But anyway, I shouldn't. You mustn't. He's a very important character in the book. And it's also just absolutely a weird story to tell about him. Okay, let's go over Smerzhikov. He's the son of Fyodor Karamazov, yet nobody in the book calls him a Karamazov, I think. If you ever find any place where anybody calls him a Karamazov, let me know. Moreover, he doesn't even seem to have any other name or a nickname or anything. And that's something strange about him, that it's partly, I think, because he's illegitimate, but more basically, it's because he doesn't have the typical Karamazov struggle within himself. He doesn't have either the two contradictory sides of the self, or, if you want to put it more in the Dmitri Ivan language, and even Alyosha language, he doesn't have a good and a bad side of the self. Now let's follow that, because that's really fascinating. And for Dostoevsky, that's going to turn out to be very important. 127, I think. We should be in Smerzhikov territory. Yep, that's chapter 6, Smerzhikov. On second page, 127, we begin to hear about him. And his old Fyodor has a nickname for him, Balaam's ass. I don't know what sort of myth or biblical thing that refers to. Does anybody? I never really worried about it. Well, because nothing comes of it. Anyway, Balaam's ass, it appeared, was the servant Smerzhikov. I'm halfway down. He was a young man of about 24. 24, by the way, is Ivan's age. That is no coincidence. As you will see, there is an important way that Smerzhikov is very tightly related to Ivan. He's a young man of about 24, remarkably unsociable and self-contained. Not that he was shy or bashful. On the contrary, he was conceited and seemed to despise everyone. Well, that's another way he's like Ivan. Ivan has contempt for everyone. I guess maybe not Alyosha, but everyone else. Certainly Dmitri and his father, and maybe not Katerina. But so maybe the Smerzhikov is worse because he despises everyone. Now, then comes this amazing episode about him, which only if you're reading it the way I'm reading it would you even think about it or notice it. I mean, I didn't even notice it at first because it is so wacky. What is his pastime? What is the thing he enjoys doing? Does anybody remember? Yeah. No, that's interesting. He went to Paris and he is the cook and he did enjoy cooking and learn to cook, but that's not his pastime. No. When something is sufficiently wacky, you can't see it. Yeah. Yes, he tortures cats and kills them, hangs them. And then, I mean, as if that wasn't wacky enough, he says mass over them and gives them a good funeral. I mean, this is the kind of thing I love about Dostoevsky in the book. I mean, the only other person I know, other writer, who can be equally outrageously far out that you can't imagine how they ever think about such a thing is Nabokov. Maybe you have to be Russian to do this. I don't know. But whatever it is, there's something unbelievably wacky. I'm going to read it to you. It's just so great. And worth reading the book just to come across it. He was an unfriendly boy and seemed to look at the world with suspicion. In his childhood, he liked to hang cats and bury them with great ceremony. He used to dress up in a sheet as though it were a surplice, that's what priests wear, and sing and wave some object over the dead cat, the way they wave the incense over in a Catholic Mass, as though it were a censer. That's where the incense is. All this he did on the sly with the greatest secrecy. Okay, so I'll tell you why. I mean, then you must ask yourself, wait, why is Dostoevsky putting this in there? I'll tell you what I think in a minute, but let's finish reading this for a minute. Gregory caught him once and beat him. He shrank in a corner and sulked there for a week. He doesn't care for you or me, the beast, Gregory said to Martha, that's his wife. He doesn't care for anyone. Then speaking directly to the boy, he asked, are you a human being? You're not a human being. You grew from the mildew in the bathhouse. That's what you are. Now, that's all pretty amazing. Let's go over it. What could be going on there? Well, so I think it shows. I mean, you have to ask, maybe I should back into this. Well, I'll come at a different angle. The question, the interesting thing next to say about Smerdyakov is he doesn't have any factors. He doesn't have a self. He's not interested in anything that motivates anybody who has a self, neither lofty nor lecherous, to form some new combination. On 129, we discover about a third of the way down. He spent some years there, that is in Moscow. That's where he learned to cook, not Paris. He spent some years there and came back remarkably changed. He looked old and so forth. That's not important. Skip to the end of that paragraph. He came back to us from Moscow well-dressed in a clean coat and clean linen. He brushed his clothes most scrupulously twice a day and was very fond of cleaning his smart calf boots with a special English polish so that they shone like mirrors. That's the most ambition he has, the most positive function he's got, is shining his boots. And always keep Ivan in the background. Ivan is also impeccable. You get the feeling, I don't know where Dostoevsky says it, but I'm convinced that Ivan is always got his hair cut and is impeccably dressed because he wants to be clean cut. He wants to be impeccable. Well, it's as if Smerdyakov is a parody of that, polishing his boots so that you can see your reflection in them. Well, maybe he's got the sensual side. Let's look. He turned out to be a first-rate cook, as he said. Fyodor Karamazov paid him a salary, almost the whole of which Smerdyakov spent on clothes, pomade, perfume, and such things. Maybe he was gay. No. Did he seem to have as much contempt for the female sex as for men? He was discreet, almost unapproachable with them. So he doesn't care about women. He doesn't care about men. He doesn't care about power. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about anything. And in fact, he doesn't have any factors in himself. And he doesn't have a self. And Gregory was right on 127 when he said, you're not a human being. You grew from the mildew in the bathhouse. That is, Gregory understands that Smerdyakov is a kind of zombie or something. He lacks any motivation that comes from the factors in the self. And Smerdyakov resented that. He says, Smerdyakov, it appears afterward, could never forgive Gregory those words. Well, what I think is, now let's go back to the cats. And I think what Dostoevsky's doing, but I'm not sure. And if you ask him, I don't know if he would know where he got this story about the cats. But he's a pretty reflective character, and he probably knows what he's doing. I think the cats are the last glimmer of the factors in Smerdyakov. That is, there's the sadistic side that kills the cats, and the lofty side that performs a beautiful funeral over them. That's a pretty factory situation. However, it looks like Gregory stamped out this when he said, you're not a human being, and Gregory remembers it all his life. He never does, he never does anything like that again. He never, out of his own motivations, does anything nasty or lofty. And my only way to think about that is that this memory, which he had all of his life of being told he wasn't a human being, somehow wiped out, instead of sort of trying to build on this minimal self and, draw out of him the sadistic and the lofty, Gregory stamped it out once and for all. So Smerdyakov hasn't any lofty side. He only can polish his boots. And he hasn't any sensual side either. That's why he's never called the Karamazov. I'm pretty sure. You can check me. And now comes an amazing puzzle. Think of yourself, if you were writing this novel and you wanted to give Smerdyakov some role in it, you'd have to give him some motivation. But he hasn't got any motivation beyond polishing his boots and that period. Now, and Dostoevsky's got this interesting issue. He wants to give, you'll see, Smerdyakov a big role in this story. But how is he going to give him any motivation to do anything? It's a fascinating move now. Just keep your eyes open. It's just brilliant what he does. Yeah. Pavel, that's right. He is at some point. That must be his first name, you think? Pavel Smerdyakov. I think you're right. But nobody ever calls him that. Ah. Where is that? Where is that? Ah. Before Confessions of a which Confessions? There are 3 chapters. No, but you have the same number of Confessions in there somewhere. 105. I see. It's the first of the Confessions. Okay. Where is he in the book? Oh, you see, I'm learning something, but I haven't figured. I don't know where you are yet, but okay, I'm looking. 105. Yep, there we are. Okay, let me get a pen. I will stop saying. It is? That's neat. I should read my handouts. What does it say? What does it say on the handout? Great. But you know his last name too. Everybody knows a little something. So I'm looking for a pen, so I won't say this next year. Okay. Thank you. So here we go. So Smerdyakov, real name. And why is he called Smerdyakov? Is that what? Yeah, it must mean something in Russian. It means what? Wait, what did you say? The stinker. Oh, really? Lots of stuff in here that I'd ever noticed. Can't keep track of everything. There's the stinker. I see that. Yeah? Okay. All that on 105. Okay. But I stick to, and I mean, if he'd been called Karamazov, I might have given up and stopped teaching the book, because he better not be. But that's all right, all that, but we just learned something. Okay. Now, the other big thing to talk about. Wow, time runs by so fast. But we've got to do a whole other chunk, hopefully today, and that is childhood memories. Because we've done only half of the Dostoevsky view about the brothers and how they got that way. There's a hint already in Smerdyakov that there's a kind of negative childhood memory that's causing a lot of, sort of wiped him out. But we want to learn a lot more about that. Dostoevsky thinks not only do people become what they are by their heredity, but they become what they are by what they experience. That's hardly a big deal. I mean, most people know that. I mean, Freud certainly knows that. But Dostoevsky has a very different view than Freud. His view is that people are influenced by very important memories, but not negative memories, but except in the case of Smerdyakov, but generally in positive memories. And so we have to look into that. You can see already that there is this heredity thing. We talked about that, where Dmitri has a personality like his mother, and both Ivan and Alyosha have the same meek mother, Sophia, but they turn out to be, and now comes the interesting thing, terribly different. They share 2 variations of her quest, her religion, but one of them is very religious, Alyosha, and one of them is totally unreligious, Ivan. In fact, it turns out to be Dmitri who is also religious. And that is, they all are in the Christian dimension, worried about love, worried about despair and salvation and so forth. They, meaning Alyosha and Dmitri. So now so it can't be heredity that determines who's in the spiritual world and who isn't. Because one of Sophia's children is in the spiritual world, and one of, whatever her name is, I forget. what was his first wife's name? Adelaida. One of Adelaida's children is in the spiritual world and one isn't. How do we account for that? Well, the way we account for that is quite amazing. Dostoevsky thinks, in a way like Freud, that childhood experiences have a big effect on people's personality. But Freud thinks that they're bad. They're traumas, as he calls them, injuries of sorts. Dostoevsky has what is perhaps a unique idea, I've never seen it anyplace else, that there are crucial childhood memories that shape the whole future of somebody who has them. And now we're going to discover two of them, and they are really amazing. On 30, we're back in Alyosha chapters, and he has his childhood memory, and it's all complicated. And where does he go? Starting in the first full paragraph. I mentioned earlier, by the way, that though he lost his mother in his 4th year, he remembered her all his life, her face, her caresses, as though she stood before me. Such memories may persist, as everyone knows, from an even earlier age, even from 2 years old, but they seldom stand out through a whole life like spots of light out of darkness, like a corner turned from a picture. And that's how it was with him. Here's the memory, a very crucial thing. He remembered one still summer evening, an open window, the slanting rays of the setting sun. He recalled this most vividly of all. Now, I can only sort of set you up to notice how strange that is, because you're about to have a dozen, or maybe 3, but anyway, crazy things are about to happen, and what he remembers is the rays of the setting sun. Now, I don't know, again, anybody who's noticed this, but keep your eyes open. Every time something important happens to Alyosha, there are rays of setting sun. And that's not just a coincidence. That's tied to the absolute deepest issue in the book. But I can't tell you more. I just tell you to notice. He remembers the slanting rays of the setting sun. Those he recalled most vividly of all. Now comes the stuff he doesn't recall quite so vividly. In the corner of the room, the holy image, that is an icon, presumably of the Virgin. And that could be important. You'd think that'd be more important than the rays of the setting sun, wouldn't you? I would. But it isn't. It won't turn out to be when the book gets all clear. In the corner of the room, the holy image, before it a lighted lamp, and on her knees before the image, his mother, sobbing hysterically with cries and moans, snatching him up in both arms, squeezing him till it hurt, and praying for him to the Mother of God, that's the image, holding him out in both arms to the image as though to put him under the mother's protection, and suddenly a nurse runs in and snatches him from her in terror. Well, that's quite a memory. And that memory sticks with him all his life. It is, in effect, what makes him do the religious things that he does later in life. That's what guides him when he becomes a monk. So in the Elders chapter, you find out, on 38, perhaps his memories of childhood brought back our monastery, to which his mother may have taken him to Mass. Perhaps the slanting sunlight, doesn't take long, does it, for this to take effect. And the holy image to which his poor crazy mother had held him up still worked upon his imagination. And brooding on these things, in effect, he goes into the monastery. So the memory's already leading him. The memory has put him into a certain dimension, you'll find out, where love, salvation, trust are the crucial things for him. Ivan, it turns out, has no childhood memory. And that's, in a way, why Ivan of the 3 brothers is out of the spiritual dimension. But you won't believe me. You're looking at me rightly with total incredulousness. But I will show you that this is much more interesting and surprising than you could ever imagine. But you have to look way back on page 636 before the other shoe drops. And I'm not going to tell you the plot. Nothing important plot-wise is going to affect you. But there is a scene in which an old German doctor is testifying in court to Dmitri's good character. And now this is, I have to tell you with other people, it's in chapter 3 of some long book called Dangerous Witnesses. It's right at the end, right before another chapter 4, Fortune smiles on Dmitri. Okay, now I'm going to read you all this. This is a very strange event. Almost as strange as the cats in its own way. About 15 lines from the bottom. The doctor's testifying, and he says, "Oh yes, I was a young man then." This is an old German doctor, I was. Well, I was 45 then, and had only just come here. And I was so sorry for the child then. That was Dmitri. I asked myself, why wouldn't I buy him a pound of nuts? See, he's a little chap. Well, I better back up a little. I remember him well, a little chap, so high, left neglected by his father. He ran around in the backyard. He ran without boots on his feet, and his little breeches were hanging by one button. Then now back to where we are. I'm going to buy him a pound of what? This is just Dostoevsky having fun. I've forgotten what it's called. A pound of what children are very fond of. What is it? What is it? The doctor began waving his hand. It grows on a tree and is gathered and given to someone. Apples? No. I think you sell apples by the dozen, not by the pound. So there's a lot of them, all little ones, and you put them in your mouth and they go crack. Nuts. Ah, yes, nuts. Okay, that's just Dostoevsky freaking out with fun. But now comes the really fun part. The doctor repeated this in the calmest way as though he had been at no loss for the word. I bought him a pound of nuts, for no one had ever bought him a pound of nuts. And I lifted my finger and I said to him, boy, Gott der Vater. And he laughed and said, Gott der Vater. Gott der Son. And he laughed again and listened, Gott der Son. And Gott der Heilige Geist. And he laughed and said as best he could, Gott der Heilige Geist. You recognize what that is? How many know any German? What? It's German. It's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Okay, we'll find out now, later in a minute, why that's important. Then he laughed, and okay, I went away, and 2 days later I happened to be passing, and he shouted to me, Uncle, Gott der Vater, Gott der Son, he had only forgotten Gott der Heilige Geist. And I reminded him of it, and I felt very sorry for him again. Then he was taken away, and I didn't see him again. 23 years passed. I'm sitting one morning in my study, a bald-headed old man, when there walks into the room a blooming young man whom I would never have recognized, except that he held up his finger and said, laughing, Gott der Vater, Gott der Son, Gott der Heilige Geist. I have just arrived and have come to thank you for the pound of nuts, for no one ever bought me a pound of nuts. You're the only one who ever did. And so forth. And then, well, let's see. I guess that's the main thing. They embrace each other and cry. So, what's going on there? Why are we being told this weird story? And why those German words? Does anybody see what Dostoevsky is doing? I doubt it. You have to read it lots of times. Yes? And well, no one has ever brought him into the religious dimension of love and caring. And the German doctor does, and it gives him a childhood memory, which he remembers all of his life, and that's the facts. And therefore that, like the memory of Alyosha with his mother, puts him in this dimension of love and damnation and salvation, which he wouldn't have if he didn't have these words said over him. What is it? Christians, you must recognize. What am I talking about? Yeah. Yeah, that's the Holy Trinity. Where do you say it over, little kids? Baptism. It's a baptism. That's what Dostoevsky's up to. That's an important episode. It's a clue to what the whole book is up to on another level. I mean, there's so many levels in the book. We're now not in the murder mystery business. We're in the spiritual business. What's happening is Dostoevsky is giving you the existential meaning of baptism. That is, what baptism isn't people saying foreign words over babies and throwing water on them. That's just magical. Dostoevsky doesn't have any interest in that magical kind of Christianity. He thinks that everything had better be commensurate with the laws of physics and chemistry. That is, he'll say that later. He talks about he wants to save the truth. He doesn't say this, but I say this. But he says he believes in the truth of physics and chemistry. He believes in the latest neuroscience, you'll see. There's an important point in the book where Dmitri is told that there are neurons that have just been discovered by Claude Bernard in Paris, and he's got to cope with that. But if Dostoevsky thinks, sure, they're neurons, and physics and chemistry is going to explain all the material world, and neuroscience is going to explain the brain, and if Christianity gets into some kind of magical state where it sort of runs up headlong into science, Christianity is definitely going to lose. So he's got a project in this book, which again, I don't know anybody else, one who has such a project, and I don't know anybody writing about the brothers who sees that he has this project, that it's very important. It's to save the truth of Christianity in such a way that it never comes into conflict with physics and chemistry, with science. And the way you do it is you take all the sacraments, all the important things, and more than the sacraments, every important symbol in Christianity, and you translate it from something magical into something existential. And you've seen it happen twice. Once in the baptism of Alyosha, that's what was happening when she held him up and dedicated him to the Virgin. That put him in the spiritual dimension for the rest of his life. And the German doctor, and this is Dostoevsky always hitting you over the head with it. I mean, unless you haven't noticed that these people's childhood memories are existentialized baptism, he just tells it to you. There's somebody saying these foreign words over him, which are the baptism words, and Dmitri gets a childhood memory which influences his behavior for the rest of his life. Now, anybody want to say anything about that? The moral of this is that you have to keep your eyes open for, and I'm going to give you a list in a minute, of all the things that Dostoevsky's going to existentialize or demagicalize. It's the same point. Let's see now where we are, though. Baptism is the sacrament that gives the soul the possibility of being saved or also damned, and it makes you open to love, and it's a condition, or it makes it possible for you to love and be loved. That's what Dostoevsky thinks baptism really is, and he doesn't care about the water and the words. It turns out that's why Alyosha and Dmitri, even though they've got different mothers, are both in the religious dimension, because they've both got these positive childhood memories. And that's why Ivan, although he has a religious mother, isn't in the spiritual dimension, because he never got any childhood memory. And I think it's why Smerzhikov is has no self, because he's got a childhood memory of being told that he's not a human being and has no self. And remember, it says, and he never forgot it. Part of the clue is that all these are bits of eternity in time. These three memories, Smerzhikov's memory of being told he had no self, and the love and the dedication to the spiritual of Alyosha and Dmitri, are all in the eternal, in the forever dimension, because there's something that they never forget. So all this is happening in there in a hurry. Now, so there is a whole tradition. Dostoevsky didn't invent it, though I don't think he knew about it. So he invented it on his own. Dostoevsky invented lots of things on his own. You'll see later he invented Nietzsche on his own. He invented terrorism, maybe not. Maybe there was terrorism around already. Just an aside, the book The Possessed, The Devils, have any of you read it? It's about a terrorist cell that they're just trying to convince the Russians that there are lots of them, and they're committing all kinds of outrageous crimes. I was teaching The Possessed in 1970 when I had in my class Patty Hearst, and Steve Weed was one of the TAs. You recognize those people? And the book was just like reality. And one day Steve Weed came in all beat up, and Patty Hearst disappeared. And this was all about they were the Symbionese Liberation Army, and it was all about this small terrorist cell, the book I was reading, The Possessed, and what was happening there. So Dostoevsky, that's an aside, invents all sorts of strange things. But right now, he's inventing what in Germany was called demythologizing. And there was a famous theologian, this was after Dostoevsky, whether Bultmann was his name, you don't need to know that. Whether Bultmann knew Dostoevsky and knew he was demythologizing, I have no idea. It would be fun if anybody had took the trouble to read Bultmann and find out, look in the index and see if he talks about Dostoevsky. I should do it. If I get time, I think I will do it. So it sounds like an interesting question. But anyway, when I talked about it as demythologizing, like demythologizing baptism, some smart students said, you shouldn't really call it demythologizing. Myths are a good thing. You don't want to get rid of myths. I mean, where would the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Homeric Greeks be without their gods and their myths? What you want is something like demagicalizing. That is, you want to take out of Christianity any elements that come around and contradict the laws of physics and chemistry. So I call it demagicalizing. And I'm saying you do it by finding the existential truth in the Christian symbols. Now I'll just stop by reading you a whole list of symbols, all of which get demagicalized and existentialized in the course of this book. Here they go. He fixes confession, the incarnation, ordination of priests, the crucifixion, immortality. He shows you angels. He shows you devils. And the hardest one and the most fun, but you have to wait a while, is he demagicalizes miracles. I mean, after all, that's a tough move, since miracles are by definition, again, you would think, against the laws of physics and chemistry. But he's got an existential truth even in miracles that is totally compatible with physics, chemistry, and neuroscience. In each of those cases, he's going to show you the existential meaning of those Christian symbols. And one second, and then on. And he's going to, and just as he did with those German words, he's going to tell you, hit you over the head if you're watching, with what symbol he's just demythologized. That's sort of a fun thing to watch when you're reading the book, when you're looking for it. Because it's like a joke. He's going to tell you, but nobody sees it. But he's going to put, like Rakitin. I mean, you saw already, you haven't seen enough. But I told you Rakitin is now a demagicalized devil. I can use that word. And what about Rakitin? He says the devil only knows when he knows something. It's that little kind of hint that Dostoevsky will tell you, and Rakitin is going to behave more and more and more like a devil as the book goes on. Now, what do you want to say?
Frankie Gregory started reading the book of Job, and that's the one in the Bible he's reading. That's when we interpreting the figure of Job into the new common sense.
I don't think so. The only reason I don't think so is I don't see him behaving like Job. I mean, it's the kind of thing which, if Gregory did behave like Job, then this would be the way Dostoevsky would hit you with it. And another reason it isn't. I think Job is not a Christian sacrament or a Christian symbol. It's every other thing that he demagicalizes is a Christian something or other. Okay,